Asylum Hotel will be closed for good under this government. Not just by shifting individuals from hotels to other sites, but by driving down the numbers in supported accommodation.
Cooper's £9 billion blunder. Why Labour's boat strategy is dead in the water. Right. Before we dive into this absolute shambles of policymaking, do me a favour and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you will want to stay informed about the political circus that's been unfolding in Westminster, and UK Connors is where you'll get the unvarnished truth that the mainstream media won't dare touch. So, Yvette Cooper thinks she's cracked the code. The Home Secretary has unveiled her grand strategy to tackle the small boats crisis, complete with temporary bans on family reunification for asylum seekers and more rigorous financial assessments. On the surface, it sounds robust, doesn't it? The kind of policy that makes for good headlines and reassuring sound bites. But here's the rub. Cooper has fundamentally misunderstood the entire dynamic at play, and it's going to cost us a staggering £9 billion in the process. Let's be brutally honest about what's actually happening in those overcrowded dinghies crossing the channel. Cooper's policy assumes these predominantly young men are coming to Britain with dreams of establishing family units, of bringing over wives and children for a cozy life in suburban England. But that's not the reality, is it? The majority aren't planning to recreate their family structures here. They're economic migrants with a very specific agenda. Work, claim benefits, and send the proceeds straight back home where their money goes significantly further. Now, I know some of you are already reaching for the comment section, so let me be clear, I'm not making moral judgments about individual choices here. What I am doing is pointing out the glaring disconnect between Cooper's policy framework and the actual economic incentives driving this crisis. If you're genuinely committed to stopping these dangerous channel crossings, you need to understand the real motivations, not the ones that fit neatly into your political narrative. The money that should be circulating in British businesses, supporting our hospitality sector, contributing to our tax base, and bolstering our local economies is instead being siphoned off through money transfer services that advertise openly across London's transport network and online platforms. It's a massive economic drain that Cooper's family reunification restrictions won't even begin to address. Here's where it gets interesting. And if you're finding this analysis valuable, do consider subscribing because we're about to delve into some uncomfortable truths that the political establishment would rather you didn't hear. The real solution to the boat's crisis isn't more bureaucratic hurdles around family visas. It's fundamentally altering the economic equation that makes these perilous journeys worthwhile in the first place. Picture this scenario, a 100% tax on overseas money transfers for recent immigrants. Suddenly, that economic incentive structure collapses entirely. Those tens of thousands of young men currently viewing the Channel crossing as a calculated economic risk would quickly reassess whether France is really such an unbearable option after all. It's crude, it's controversial, but unlike Cooper's window dressing measures, it actually addresses a core issue. But Cooper won't consider such an approach because it requires acknowledging some politically inconvenient realities about the nature of irregular migration. Instead, we're getting this £9 billion exercise and missing the point entirely. Money that could transform our infrastructure, support our NHS, or address the housing crisis that's making life increasingly difficult for British families. The tragedy here isn't just a waste of resources. Though that's infuriating enough, it's a continued loss of life in the Channel while politicians engage in policy theatre. Every day Cooper's department operates under these fundamental misunderstandings is another day that dangerous crossings continue, that criminal gangs profit, and that genuine asylum seekers become collateral damage in a system that refuses to engage with reality. And speaking of reality checks, let's talk about the broader pattern of political incompetence this represents. Cooper's approach epitomizes everything that's wrong with contemporary British politics. The assumption that good intentions and bureaucratic complexity can substitute for hard thinking and uncomfortable choices. If you appreciate this kind of no-nonsense analysis, make sure you're subscribed because there's plenty more political incompetence to dissect in the coming weeks. This isn't the first time we've seen Labour politicians completely misjudge the dynamics of immigration policy. Remember the British jobs for British workers promise? The points-based system debates? The pattern is always the same. Grand announcements, administrative tinkering, and a stubborn refusal to acknowledge the actual incentive structures driving behavior. The £9 billion question, quite literally, is whether Cooper genuinely believes her own rhetoric or whether this is simply political positioning designed to appear tough while avoiding the genuinely difficult decisions. Either way, it's a damning indictment of a fitness for one of the most challenging roles in government. What makes this particularly galling is the opportunity cost involved. £9 billion represents serious money in the context of public spending, money that could address the root causes of social instability that make irregular migration such a politically volatile issue. Instead, we're witnessing an expensive exercise in bureaucratic box-ticking that will achieve precisely nothing while providing Cooper with talking points for the next election cycle. The small boats crisis requires serious people making serious decisions based on serious analysis of the actual dynamics involved. Cooper's announcement demonstrates that she is fundamentally unserious about solving this problem. She's more interested in managing the politics than addressing the reality. Here's what genuine leadership would look like: acknowledging that most irregular channel crossings are economically motivated, designing policies that address those economic incentives directly, and being honest with the public about the trade-offs involved. Instead, we're getting this elaborate charade of tough-sounding measures that completely miss the target. The international implications are equally concerning. France is watching this unfold with barely concealed amusement. They know Cooper's measures won't reduce the pressure on Calais and Dunkirk because they don't address why people are leaving France in the first place. This isn't about persecution or safety. It's about economic opportunity and the generous benefit systems that await successful channel crossers. For those of you still with me, and if you are, you should definitely subscribe for more of this essential political commentary. The deeper question is what this reveals about Labour's broader approach to governance. If they are this wrong about something as fundamental as migration incentives, what else are they getting catastrophically wrong? The housing crisis, for instance, can't be understood without acknowledging the additional demand pressure from irregular migration. The strain on public services, the pressure on wages in certain sectors, the social cohesion challenges in affected communities, none of these can be addressed without honest analysis of the factors Cooper refuses to acknowledge. This brings us to the democratic deficit at the heart of contemporary British politics. Voters consistently express concerns about irregular migration, yet their elected representatives respond with policies designed more for Westminster consumption than real-world effectiveness. Cooper's announcement is a perfect example. It sounds authoritative to political journalists while doing absolutely nothing to address the underlying problem. The criminal gangs operating these channel crossing routes are probably celebrating Cooper's announcement. They know it won't affect their business model one bit. The dangerous crossings will continue, the profits will keep flowing, and the political blame game will intensify while nothing fundamental changes. What's particularly frustrating is that there are countries that have successfully addressed similar challenges through honest policymaking rather than political theatre. Australia's approach to irregular maritime arrivals, for instance, was controversial but effective because it addressed actual incentives rather than engaging in bureaucratic displacement activity. But Cooper can't learn from international examples because doing so would require acknowledging that her fundamental assumptions about migration motivations are wrong. It's easier to spend £9 billion on ineffective measures than to admit that the policy framework has been based on political convenience rather than empirical reality. The media's role in this fiasco deserves scrutiny too, and this is exactly why independent voices like UK Connors are essential, so do hit subscribe if you haven't already. Most political journalists will report Cooper's announcement uncritically, focusing on the administrative details rather than questioning whether the underlying logic makes any sense. This isn't about left versus right politics. It's about competence versus incompetence, reality versus wishful thinking. There are Labour politicians who understand these issues clearly, just as there are Conservative politicians who peddle equally useless solutions. The problem is institutional, not partisan. Cooper's £9 billion mistake represents everything wrong with Britain's political class. The preference for expensive gestures over effective action, the refusal to engage with uncomfortable realities, and the assumption that good intentions can substitute for good policy. Until we have politicians willing to address migration as it actually exists rather than as they wish it existed, these dangerous channel crossings will continue, lives will be lost, and public money will be wasted on an industrial scale. The boats won't stop because Cooper doesn't understand why they are coming in the first place. It's that simple and that damaging. We deserve better leadership, better policies, and honest politicians willing to engage with reality rather than hiding behind bureaucratic complexity. That's a real tragedy of this £9 billion blunder, not just a waste, but the missed opportunity for genuine solutions. That's where we'll leave it today, but this story is far from over. Cooper's policy will fail, The boats will keep coming, and the political blame game will intensify. Make sure you're subscribed to UK Connors because we'll be tracking every development, every failure, and every attempt to spin this disaster as success. The British public deserves the truth, and that's exactly what you'll get here. No spin, no political correctness, just honest analysis of the political circus that governs our lives.